Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going on a deep dive. It's going to be all about evolution, kind of like stepping back into a biology classroom. And we'll be using this textbook here to help us explore, how do species change? That's what I always want to know. And what role do things like mutations and sexual reproduction play?
Well, it's amazing when you stop and look around at just how much variety of life there is out there. Like, take the Galapagos finches, for example. Each of those species has, developed a unique beak, and it's perfectly suited to what it eats.
Oh, yeah. You see some with those longer beaks for, reaching into flowers, or others with those shorter, stronger ones for cracking open seeds. So how did those different beaks, develop?
Well, that's where the concept of variation comes in, the different beak shapes. They didn't just kind of appear out of nowhere, right? They were already present in the original finch population. So some of the finches would naturally had slightly longer beaks, and then others had those shorter, thicker ones.
So it's like having a whole pool of different traits that are available, and then nature is what selects the ones that work best, right,
Yeah.
for a specific environment.
Exactly. So think about it this way. The finches that had the beaks that were best suited to the food that was available, well, those were the ones that were more likely to survive. They'd reproduce and pass on, those winning beak traits down to their offspring. That's natural selection at work. And over many generations, this can lead to the evolution of brand new species.
Okay, yeah, that's starting to make sense. But where do those variations even come from originally?
Well, there are two big players. One is genetic mutations, and then the other is sexual reproduction. Mutations are kind of like tiny little typos. They happen in the DNA code. And most mutations are harmless, but some can be beneficial. They give an organism a little bit of an edge. So imagine, for example, a mutation that makes a plant, well, makes it a little more tolerant to drought. So in an environment that's really dry, that plant is going to have a better chance at surviving and passing on those, drought-resistant genes.
So it's kind of like a genetic lottery, and sometimes you get those mutations that really pay off. But what about sexual reproduction? How does that contribute to variation?
Okay, well, think of sexual reproduction as nature's way of shuffling up that genetic deck of cards. So when organisms reproduce sexually, their offspring, they inherit this unique combination of genes from both parents, right? So it's kind of like mixing and matching different traits to create even more diversity within that population.
So it's not even just about inheriting traits directly, right?
Yeah.
It's about these new combinations that are being made.
Exactly. And this constant kind of mixing, this remixing of genes, it's what's fueling this engine of evolution. It's like providing this endless source of variation for natural selection to act on.
This is so fascinating. So we got these tiny changes happening, at the genetic level, and then sexual reproduction kind of like shuffles everything up, creates even more diversity.
Right. And that diversity is just crucial for species if they want to adapt and survive, especially as environments are always changing. So imagine if you had a population where everyone was basically identical. Well, it'd be a lot harder to cope with different challenges, like diseases or climate change.
Yeah, it's like having this diverse toolbox, right?
Hmm.
The more tools you've got available to you, the better prepared you are for whatever's going to come your way.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about how scientists actually piece together the evolutionary history of different species. It's like solving this giant biological jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But how do they even start putting the pieces together? That just seems like such a daunting task.
Well, they use different lines of evidence, kind of like a detective gathering all the clues. And one of the big ones is anatomy. Comparing physical features, you can even do this with fossils. It can reveal if there's a shared ancestry. So, for instance, the fossil of Archaeopteryx, it actually shows that it has features of both reptiles and birds, suggesting there's a link between those two groups.
So the fossils are kind of like, time machines, giving us those glimpses into the past and helping us to understand how species have evolved over, millions of years.
Absolutely. Another clue comes from embryology. Similarities in embryonic development that can also point to this common ancestry, even when the adult forms look completely different. So did you know that sea squirts, they look nothing like us, but they actually share some really key features with vertebrate embryos?
Wow, that's amazing. So even if two creatures look totally different as adults, they might have actually started out looking very similar, like as embryos. It's like discovering this hidden family resemblance.
That's a great way to put it. And those similarities in, early development, they provide really strong evidence for this shared ancestry.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
But how do scientists compare things like at a molecular level.
Yeah. Well, that's where biochemistry comes in. Scientists can actually compare protein molecules, like insulin, for instance, and that's to reveal any genetic similarities and any differences. Remember, proteins are like those building blocks of life, and their structure is actually determined by genes.
So if two species have very similar insulin molecules, that's a pretty good sign that they're closely related, right?
Exactly. It's almost like comparing blueprints. And the more similar those blueprints are, well, the more closely related the structures are going to be. And then, of course, we have DNA analysis. It's kind of like the ultimate tool when you're determining relatedness. So the more similar the DNA sequences are, the closer the evolutionary relationship is.
Oh, wow. It's like DNA is this ultimate detective, you know? It's
Yeah.
revealing all those secrets of ancestry and evolution, like a biological family tree, but so much more accurate.
That's a great analogy. And this technology, it's not just for understanding the past, it's also being used to track the transmission of diseases and to develop, new treatments, even solve crimes.
Wow. So DNA analysis is kind of like this window into the past, the present, and even the future of life on Earth.
Absolutely. It really highlights just how interconnected all living things are.
Okay, so we've talked about variation, natural selection, and all these different lines of evidence. But how in the world do scientists actually organize all of this information? It just seems like there's this massive amount of data.
Right. Well, that's where phylogeny comes in. And it's basically the study of evolutionary history and relationships between organisms. So think of it like a family tree, but for species. That's kind of what a phylogenetic tree looks like. And the branches, they represent different lineages that have all evolved over time.
So it's this visual representation showing how all of these different species are connected and how they've branched off from their common ancestors.
Exactly. And we use terms like primitive characteristics and derived characteristics to describe the features that kind of link these species together.
Okay, I think I need those broken down a little bit for me. What's the difference?
Okay, so primitive characteristics are features that are shared by all of the members of a group because they inherited them from a common ancestor. So think of those as like the original features. And then derived characteristics, well, those are the newer features that kind of arise in these specific lineages. And they're what kind of set one branch of the family apart from the other ones.
Ah, got it. So the primitive characteristics are like, those family heirlooms that get passed down through generations. And then the derived characteristics are those unique traits that make each family member special.
That's a great way to think about it. And the phylogenetic tree just helps us to understand how those traits have evolved and how they relate to like the overall evolutionary history. And it's a very dynamic and ever-evolving field of study, as new evidence comes out.
Okay, so we've got our phylogenetic tree all laid out. But how do scientists know which branch goes where? Is there like a specific method that they use?
Yes, that's where cladistics comes in. And it's basically a classification system that is based on phylogeny. So scientists use shared derived characteristics. They use those to create these branching diagrams called cladograms. And those help to test different hypotheses about evolutionary relationships.
So cladograms are kind of like taking the phylogenetic tree and then using it to play a game of who's most closely related.
Exactly. And sometimes those relationships aren't very obvious at all. Take the giant panda, for example. For over a century, scientists debated whether it was more closely related to bears or to raccoons.
Really? I mean, a panda looks a lot more like a bear to me. Why was there even like a debate about it?
Well, pandas actually have characteristics from both groups, but cladistic analysis, which uses biochemical and genetic data, ultimately placed it, closer to bears.
Wow. So even with all the evidence, there's still room for like debate and discovery in this world of phylogeny. It's like this, never-ending detective story.
You got it. And that's what makes it so fascinating. There's just always more to learn and explore about just the incredible diversity of life on Earth.
This is all so mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it? And we've really only just scratched the surface.
Okay, so before we were talking about how scientists use these different tools to trace like evolutionary relationships. And it's crazy how much we can learn from just, fossils, embryos, even molecules. But it makes me think, how do we even use this knowledge, like practically?
Well, that's a great question. Understanding evolution isn't just about satisfying scientific curiosity. It has real-world applications, especially in fields like medicine and agriculture.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
Well, let's say scientists are trying to find a new drug or a treatment, right?
Yeah.
And they find a compound, maybe in a plant or an animal, but it's, hard to extract, or they can't produce it in large quantities.
So what do they do then?
Well, that's where phylogeny comes in. If they know the evolutionary relationships of that particular species, they can look for similar compounds in species that are closely related. It's kind of like saying, well, if this plant has these medicinal properties, maybe its, cousins do too.
It's so smart, like using a family tree to find new sources of medicine.
Exactly. And phylogeny can also help us to track like the spread of diseases because diseases, well, they often jump more easily between species that share some genetic characteristics. So by understanding those relationships, it can help us to develop and test treatments much more effectively.
So it's like knowing which family members might be uh, most susceptible to a certain illness. That information could be, crucial for preventing and um, treating it.
Exactly. That shows you just how interconnected we are with every living thing.
This is all so fascinating, but I have a confession. I remember really struggling with some of these concepts, back in school, like meiosis, for example. It just seems so complicated to me.
Yeah, I understand. I get it. Meiosis can be a little bit tricky, but it's really elegant when you actually break it down.
Well, maybe you can help me understand it a little better now that I'm a bit older, maybe a bit wiser.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So think of meiosis as this special type of cell division. It's what creates the, sex cells, the sperm and the egg. Remember how we were talking about sexual reproduction, shuffling up that genetic deck of cards? Well, meiosis is the process that makes all of that shuffling possible.
Okay, I'm listening. Walk me through it.
All right, so you start with a cell, and it has a full set of chromosomes. During meiosis, that cell goes through 2 rounds of division, and the result is 4 cells. And each one has half the number of chromosomes.
Wait, hold on. Why do they end up with half the number of chromosomes?
Ah, well, that's the key. When a sperm and an egg combine, during fertilization, their half sets of chromosomes, they come together. And they
Right.
create a new cell with a full set. And that's a brand new individual.
Oh, I see. So it's like each parent is contributing half of the genetic blueprint.
Exactly. But here's where the shuffling actually comes in. During mitosis, the chromosomes exchange bits of genetic material, kind of like they're swapping trading cards. It's called crossing over.
So it's not even like just splitting in half. There's this mixing and matching going on at the same time.
Precisely. And that is what creates all that amazing diversity that we've been talking about. Each sperm or egg cell is genetically unique, and it's all thanks to the shuffling that's happening during meiosis.
Wow. It's like this cellular dance party where everyone's swapping partners and creating new combinations.
That's a great analogy. It's like a beautifully choreographed process. It ensures that there's genetic variation, and it fuels like the ongoing evolution of life.
Okay, this makes so much more sense to me now. You've totally demystified meiosis for me.
I'm glad to hear it. Remember, even the most complicated concepts, you can understand them if you just kind of break them down step by step.
Okay, ready for the next challenge. Our textbook also mentions this thing called foods for tomorrow. What is that all about?
Yes. That section actually explores the origins of our food, and it looks at how understanding plant diversity can help us develop more sustainable food systems for the future. It's where biology and agriculture and even history all kind of intersect.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. I love food, and I'm always up for learning, about where it comes from.
Well, did you know that a lot of the fruits and vegetables and grains that we eat today, they actually originated in tropical regions? Things like bananas and rice, coffee, chocolate. They all have this, fascinating history of cultivation and trade that goes back centuries.
Wow, I had no idea. So like the banana I had for breakfast this morning, it traveled a long way to get to my plate.
Most likely. And it's all thanks to, humans understanding plant diversity and selectively breeding these crops for desirable traits like, taste, size, yield. For centuries, farmers have been modifying the genetic makeup of our food. They were doing it even without realizing the underlying science behind it.
So it's like they were doing genetic engineering before genetic engineering was even a thing.
Exactly. And now, today, with modern biotechnology, we have even more tools to enhance our food supply. Genetically modified crops, they're becoming more and more common, and they offer a lot of benefits. Like, they're more pest resistant, or they have higher nutritional content.
But there's a lot of debate around GMOs.
Yeah.
Some people are concerned about their safety and the impact that they might have on the environment.
That's true. It's super important to approach these technologies cautiously. And we got to consider all the potential risks and the benefits. Open and honest dialogue is essential to really navigate these complex issues, so we can ensure that we have a sustainable and equitable food system for everyone.
Absolutely. We need to be really informed consumers and, responsible stewards of our planet. Speaking of stewardship, the textbook also mentions preserving rare and unusual food plants. Why is that important?
That's a really crucial point. Maintaining biodiversity in our food crops is essential for a bunch of reasons. First of all, it ensures resilience against, pests and diseases. If we only rely on a few varieties of a crop, a single disease outbreak could just wipe out our entire supply.
So putting all our eggs in one basket, like you said.
Yeah.
Not a great strategy.
Exactly. And secondly, preserving these diverse food plants, well, it helps us to adapt to, climate change because different varieties, they have different tolerances to drought, heat, other environmental stresses. So a wider range of options just means we're better equipped to face whatever challenges come up in the future.
So it's like having a backup plan or like multiple backup plans. The more diversity we have, the better our chances of, survival.
Precisely. And let's not forget about the cultural and culinary value of these diverse food plants. Exploring these new flavors and ingredients, it just enriches our lives. And it connects us to, different cultures and traditions.
It's like a global food adventure. Who knows what delicious discoveries are out there waiting for us?
That's the spirit. So remember, biodiversity isn't just about, protecting endangered species in rainforests. It's also about the food that we eat, the medicines that we rely on, the overall health of our planet. We're all part of this really intricate web of life.
Yeah, I'm starting to see just how interconnected everything really is. Our choices, even about something as simple as what we eat, they can have really far-reaching consequences.
That's right. And speaking of choices, our textbook mentions this really interesting experiment that shows how even small changes can lead to these big evolutionary shifts. And it involves paper birds.
Paper birds, what do they have to do with evolution?
Well, it's this clever way to demonstrate the principles of variation and natural selection. Like in action, you can actually manipulate the genes of these paper birds and then see how those changes affect, their survival.
Okay, you've definitely got me intrigued now.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these paper birds. How can they teach us about evolution?
Well, imagine you're this bird breeder. But instead of feathers and beaks, you're working with paper wings and, a little bit of chance. The Avis papyrus experiment, as it's called. It's this hands-on way to kind of see evolution happening in front of you.
Okay, so how does it work? Do we, get to build these birds ourselves?
Exactly. So you start by creating this population of paper birds, and each one has a slightly different wing shape. And this variation is introduced randomly, like through a coin flip or a roll of the dice, and it's simulating those genetic mutations.
So it's like each of the paper birds has this, unique set of genes that determines what their wing shape is going to be.
Precisely. And then comes the fun part, the flight test. You launch all your birds and you see how far they can fly. The ones that fly the farthest, well, those are considered the fittest. And they get to reproduce. And they pass on their genes to, the next generation.
Oh, so it's like survival of the fittest, but with paper birds.
Exactly. And here's what's really cool. You can actually manipulate the environment to see how it affects evolution. So imagine introducing a windy condition to your flight test area. What do you think would happen?
Well, I'm guessing that the birds with the larger, sturdier wings would have, an advantage in that kind of environment because they wouldn't be blown off course as easily.
You got it. You're thinking like an evolutionary biologist. Now, the paper bird experiment, it's a simplified model, of course, but it really beautifully illustrates how those environmental pressures can really shape the evolution of a population.
Wow, this is making me see evolution in a whole new light. It's not just about, dinosaurs and fossils. It's happening all around us, even in something as simple as, a paper bird.
Absolutely. Evolution is this ongoing process, and it affects every living thing on Earth. And, the more we understand it, the better equipped we are to navigate all those challenges and all the opportunities that are, lying ahead.
Okay, I think I'm getting the hang of this whole evolution thing. But what does it all mean for us, for humans, in the grand scheme of things?
Well, that's a really big question. And it brings us back to that idea of interconnectedness, of all life on Earth, understanding evolution, it helps us to appreciate our place in this big web. And it also has some very practical implications for our future.
Like what?
Eh,
What kind of practical implications?
Oh, remember we were talking about food security and
Yeah.
how important it is to preserve that biodiversity.
Yeah. You said that relying on just a few varieties of a crop is really risky because one single disease could just wipe them all out.
Exactly. And that's why understanding those evolutionary relationships is so important for, for agriculture. By studying the wild relatives of our crops, scientists can actually identify genes that give them resistance, to pests or diseases or even just harsh environmental conditions.
So it's like we're looking back at, the family tree to find these long-lost relatives, and they might have superpowers that we could, borrow.
That's a great way to put it. And those superpowers, they could be really crucial for helping us adapt our crops, especially as the climate changes. We need food that can withstand drought, heat, floods, all those challenges that come with a world that's, well, less predictable.
So by understanding how plants have evolved to survive in different environments, that can help make sure that we have enough food for, for everyone, even as the climate changes.
Precisely. It's like having a roadmap to developing these resilient and sustainable food systems.
That's incredible. It makes you realize that evolution isn't just like, this abstract concept. It's totally intertwined with our survival as a species.
Absolutely. And it's not just about food either. Understanding evolution also has implications for, medicine, conservation, even technology. Like, for example, scientists are looking at the evolutionary history of viruses, and they're doing that so they can develop more effective vaccines.
Wow. So we're using our knowledge of the past to help prepare for the future.
Exactly. By understanding those evolutionary processes that have, shaped life on Earth, we can actually develop solutions to some of the biggest challenges that humanity is facing.
Oh, this has been such an incredible journey. I feel like I have like this whole new appreciation for the power of evolution and just how amazing it is.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. Just remember, evolution is an ongoing process. It's this
Sure.
grand experiment that's been going on for, billions of years, and we're all a part of it. We're all shaping the future of life on Earth.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
And a lot to explore. The world of biology is, well, it's just full of these amazing discoveries that are waiting to be made. Just keep asking questions, stay curious, and, never stop learning about all the amazing diversity of life on Earth.
And that's it for today's deep dive. We'll see you next